Hey everybody, this is Eve West. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to promoting a book I wrote. It's called Follow. It's an ebook. You can find it on Amazon.com under the ebooks tab. Under the Kindle tab. And it's a book about spirituality and looking at it not just from a purely psychological, metaphysical aspect of a human being, such as love and creativity and intuition, all those intangible etheric aspects of who we are. Some people call it strictly spiritual. But we also have an earthly side, which is related to the reptilian brain, and that's what you can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. And so I focus on very controversial topics as it pertains to spirituality, looking at race and sex and money and so forth. And these are typically things that we're shunned for discussing in spiritual circles, but they're also integral to who we are as a Christ, if you will. So a Christ is not just spiritual, but a Christ is also earthly. But within this particular matrix environment, we're designed to deny the earthly, so we can be super duper spiritual and psychological, which is unholy. And so at the end of our incarnation, we're brought to judgment, and we have to face the masculine aspect of ourselves that we were made to suppress. So my last few videos, I've been focusing on Monarch programming, or some people refer to it as MK Ultra. But Monarch programming and MK Ultra, basically, it's the same thing. Deals with dissociation and splits, mind splitting. The entire matrix environment is designed to split the mind, okay? So it's designed to split the mind between the conscious ego and the unconscious astral self. Everything within our reality is designed to do this, and I focus on the various constructs of the matrix within our reality, and I do that within my book Follow. And I focus on media and entertainment. That's a really big one. Religion is also a big one. I'm going to talk about that in this particular video. What is it? Education, the familial structure, the government structure itself. All of those are very integral to splitting the mind. And so, for example, when we look at media and entertainment, we're always taught that, media and entertainment specifically cultivates a desire for the 7 deadly sins. But we are, I guess what you would say, shunned, if you will, or judged if we partake in those sins. And so we have lust always put in our faces. And the creators of this reality, they even, subliminally feed us a desire for lust or sex, such as, in candy commercials and so forth. They play music that's sexually suggestive and so forth. Like one of them was a Reese's chocolate bunny commercial for Easter, and the song in the commercial was Marvin Gaye's "Let's Get It On," right? That's Marvin Gaye, right? And so, this is Easter. And so you say to yourself, that's such a psychological split, because people typically don't associate Easter with sex. However, in this particular case it was. And so it really goes to show that sex is always pushed to the forefront. But if we are whores and we indulge in sex, then we are judged, if you will, for it. So really, this creates within the same mind a psychological splitting. And so the ego, which is the God aspect of you, judges sex and say, you shouldn't overindulge in sex or what have you. But the unconscious aspect of you, when you go to sleep at night, you shed your concepts and you work out your restrictions of the matrix, and you shed your concepts of yourself. So you're not a woman, you're not a man, you're not rich, you're not poor, you're not black, white, rich, poor, whatever it is. When we go to sleep at night, we're nothing. So that's what you are when you go back to the spiritual realm. And when you're working out your restrictions, you are working out the sexual desire that was cultivated within your consciousness when you were an ego. So, this is just to kind of give you an example of what mind splitting is. And many people, believe that they have a choice within the matrix. People are like, oh, just because you saw that Reese's commercial with the sex with the sex commercial with the music in it doesn't mean that you have to indulge in sex. You can make a conscious decision. Well, you can only make conscious decisions when you have knowledge. So if you're not really consciously aware that this is what's being presented to your consciousness, you don't have a conscious decision. You're a slave. And so I use the example oftentimes, if I took something and I flashed it within your, frame of view, but I took it away, and you couldn't recall it within the beta brainwave of the ego, because your brain waves as an ego are very chaotic. You kind of can think about this when you go to the hospital and you see people on that monitor or whatever. Their brain waves are hooked up to the monitor. So beta is very chaotic, but the closer that you get to death, the slower your brain waves are until you eventually die. And so when it's very chaotic like that, the ego does not catch everything. Everything happens very quickly. And so if you can't get yourself into a slower brain wave to retrieve the information that I flashed into your consciousness, then you are what we call a slave, and I would be considered God, because I know something that's in your consciousness but that you do not know. So if you can't get yourself into a deep state of meditation, such as in theta, a state of hypnosis, then there's something in there that you're not aware of. And this is very dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. But this is what happens when you're brought to judgment at the end of your life. And so you're brought to judgment about things that you're not aware of, that's in your mind, pretty much. So this is mind splitting. And that's just one particular example, but all the 7 deadly sins are perpetuated within are cultivated within our consciousness, a desire for them: wrath, lust, gluttony, envy, vanity, all of them. So I really wanted to focus specifically not just on media and entertainment, because I do have some videos that really outline how media and entertainment specifically kind of splits our consciousness, but I've been focusing a lot more on what I call spiritual doctrines, because as I was waking up in the matrix, because I was abruptly awoken by my handler, which is King James of Scotland, from the astral realm. And being woken up abruptly, it was intentional for this to happen, because whenever you're awoken abruptly within the matrix, it creates a lot of hell for you. In other words, it creates a lot of negative loosh energy. And so negative loosh is what feeds the parasites that actually govern our matrix reality. It's suffering. So if you were taught, like for example, I was taught that Jesus died for my sins, and there's power in the name of Jesus, and yada yada. And so to find out that his name would not have been named Jesus, because the letter J did not exist during the time that he would have existed, created a lot of negative loosh. That was just a flat out lie. And so once I found out the occult meaning behind, Jesus and what that figure really represents per se, I got more understanding, but I was abruptly awoken to the fact that that is just a name, and that really that name is made up, so to speak. So this creates a lot of negative loosh energy for someone who's been taught and conditioned to believe in these things. And so, when you get certain artists like Kanye West and Jay-Z who are making fun of Jesus and calling themselves Yeezus and Hove, they're really, making fun of you. They're like, you really believe in Jesus? You really believe in Jehovah or what have you? They're like, I'm Jesus, I'm Jehovah. So they really know that they are God. But the regular sheeple, we're supposed to just accept these, what you would call, gods of the demiurge, if you will, as being quote unquote real. And so that's what it means in terms of an occult standpoint, if you will. Now, I'm not knocking anyone's beliefs. You believe in Jesus and you believe that he's real, then that's fine for you. That's fine all day. I'm not disputing that for you, but as far as, the research is concerned, the research is done. His name wouldn't have been named Jesus, because letter J didn't exist during the time that he would have existed. So, that's for me, it is what it is, and I'm not arguing against anyone else's beliefs, but I'm doing this channel to give you information about my experience and, what Jesus means to me. So What he means to you, absolutely fine with me. And so I really wanted to talk about, when it comes to MK Ultra and Monarch programming and mind splits, how spiritual doctrines are used to do that. And so I talked about in my first MK Ultra video about the Bible, and how there's tons of contradictions within the Bible that feeds, really, that creates a split within the mind. And so, for example, when it talks about how, Jesus is the Prince of Peace, however, it also says that he did not come to bring peace but a sword. So that's a contradiction. There's so many of them. In the Bible, it talks about how you can't serve two masters. However, it tells you to serve, Christ as you would your earthly masters. Or, it talks about how, there isn't going to be a sign, if you will, for the coming of the Lord. But in the book of Acts, the Lord in the book of Acts talks about how there will be smoke and blood and all these different signs to indicate that of his coming. And so, there's just so many contradictions. The Lord did not bring his son to condemn the world, but to, free the world. But in another scripture, it talks about how, the Lord entrusts judgment unto his son to judge the world. And so I tried to pick out really blatant examples. One of the biggest ones was in Exodus, where it says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." And, we all know the 10 Commandments, right? However, in Deuteronomy 28:30, it says that basically it's saying that if you don't follow the Lord's commandments, these bugs. But if you don't follow the Lord's commandments, that he's going to cause somebody to sleep with your wife. Somebody else to sleep with your wife. That's adultery. So the Lord is advocating adultery here, because he's saying, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to cause somebody else to sleep with your wife. So, or maybe some people wouldn't consider that advocating, but he's saying that I'm going to cause adultery. That's what he's saying. And so, this is scripture. Deuteronomy, look it up. Deuteronomy 28:30. So, when I saw that, I was actually quite flabbergasted, because, a lot of things have definitely been kept from view. And so, since I've attained a lot of knowledge within the matrix, I've become what you would call a divergent. And being a divergent, I'm very much demonized within my community, also within my home environment as well. I've been gang stalked in different places like the airport, the library, at the grocery store, at department stores. It's pretty much everywhere. It's a way of life, so to speak. And many people, they describe gang stalking like paper cuts. You won't die from one paper cut, but 10,000 paper cuts you will die from. And so, really, to be honest with you, since I'm vibrating higher as a what you would call Lucifer or Luciferian, because Lucifer just means light bearer. Within the matrix environment, that's a trigger word for people. When you hear Lucifer, people get very afraid. But Lucifer just means light bearer or bearer of knowledge. And so that's why in the movie Lucy, Scarlett Johansson, she was very smart. She was a light bearer. That's why they named her Lucy instead of Lucifer, because she's playing the female counterpart of Lucifer. And so she had the more she gained access to the different parts of her brain, the more she was targeted within the matrix environment before she disappeared. So typically you die. You transition out and you go to another dimension after you reach a certain amount of knowledge. And so, in saying this and going back to the Bible and seeing all these contradictions, the Bible itself, given the examples that I've given, the research I've done, I've clearly proven that there's contradictions. And I have another video, it's called Contradictions in the Bible or something like that, something about contradictions. And like I said, my MK Ultra Monarch programming part 1 also gives the rundown of contradictions that I outlined to support that, in addition to other various constructs of the matrix such as media and entertainment, that religion is also a part of that, our false matrix reality. designed to split the mind. And so I wanted to focus on another doctrine that I actually started practicing as I was abruptly awoken by King James of Scotland from the astral realm. And that is called A Course in Miracles. It's called A Course in Miracles. And many people are familiar with A Course in Miracles. If you do A Course in Miracles and you love A Course in Miracles, hey, more power to you. But, in terms of my experience with A Course in Miracles, I was literally driven crazy. I was literally driven insane. And it has done a lot to murder my consciousness. And it forced me into a nervous breakdown. I had a nervous breakdown. And as I explain the Course to you, you will discover why. A Course in Miracles is really meant to dissociate you. When you hear about MK Ultra, what have you, and split personalities, in order to create these split personalities and alters, you have to have the person dissociate. You have to have them dissociate and kind of lose touch with reality. And so if you look at the first lesson of A Course in Miracles, it teaches that. It teaches you to lose touch with your reality. And it says things like this, body is not real or means nothing. The sign does not mean nothing. This does not mean nothing. That does not mean nothing. It really outlines specific things that, it tells you that tangible things do not mean anything. But this contradicts the world, because in the world, things do mean something. Like, for example, it says this sign does not mean anything. So if you say a sign does not mean anything and you're driving down the road, right, and you see a stop sign, someone who's doing A Course in Miracles may run the stop sign because they're like, well, that sign doesn't mean anything. And if you run the stop sign, you would, what would happen? Would you get into a car accident? And so, because you've dissociated from reality, hey, you will have consequences at the physical atomic level unless you actually get into a different state of consciousness. When you get into a different state of consciousness, it's different. You can actually make reality bend to you instead of you bend to reality. However, if the mind is not healed, and you can't get into a slower brainwave frequency, then you are subjected to what I would call laws of the universe. You're subjected to laws of the universe. And so, the laws of the universe can be broken when you're in a different brainwave frequency. Like, for example, I saw something with Oprah Winfrey. I think she was doing something on her Super Soul Sunday, what have you. She was walking on hot coals. And so, the law of the universe is if you walk on hot coals, what will happen to you? You'll get burned. But if you get yourself into a slower brainwave frequency and you're able to erase that law and reprogram the mind, then you won't be burned, And so really when you access different brainwave frequencies, slower brainwave frequencies, you nullify the laws of the universe. That's why, for example, if a mother saw her child's stuck under a car or something like that, like say if there's if the child's foot or something like that, or was caught under a car, that mother, in terms of the laws of the universe, is not physically capable of picking a car up and getting that child from underneath it. But there have been stories where people have done superhuman things like that to save their child or to do something heroic, and it defies the laws of the universe. And that's because they put themselves into a different state of being, because the state of the ego, the beta brainwave state, is really psychological. But when you can get past the psyche and go into another state, then you are, this is where your divinity lies. This is where divinity lies. And so you're able to have free will and to do the things that you want to do and will things into existence, as opposed to be subjected to the psychological mind, which is governed by this false matrix reality. So, let's get into A Course in Miracles and how it teaches you dissociation, okay, psychological splitting. And to me, this is a more severe degree of psychological splitting than the Bible, because, in the Bible, the splits kind of are all over the place. But within A Course in Miracles, you will see the rhetoric that it, that the splitting or the contradictions are like within the same paragraph, like within the same sentence even at times. And so this jumbles the brain up, because the thing about your brain is your brain learns things in patterns. It learns things in patterns. That's how you learn. In school, before you learn to read, you learned the alphabet, right? And so or you learn to sound out letters. But before you learn to sound out letters, you learned the alphabet. And so it's a building block, if you will. You have a foundation, and you build on that foundation until you learn something. And so when you're reading something, it's all about a pattern. It's like with Greek mythology. If you learn about Greek myths or what have you, the pattern usually at the end was to give you a moral of the story. And so, your brain kind of locked onto that pattern, and so that's how you were able to decipher and read something and comprehend like a Greek myth or something like that. However, with A Course in Miracles, it's difficult for the brain to lock onto a pattern. There really is no pattern when it comes to A Course in Miracles, and because there's so many contradictions, it's designed to jumble the brain up, to give you a bunch of contradictions fed into your consciousness, and this breaks your consciousness really, especially after you've dissociated. So let's look at really the overarching, quote of A Course in Miracles. And it says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God. And so right then and there, it's telling you that really in a way, you're not real. That's what it's telling you. It says nothing real can be threatened. So it's telling you you can't be threatened. And since you can't be threatened, then that must mean that you're not real. And so what does that mean when you're really feeding the consciousness that, someone that they're not real? Like, what if someone told you that you're not real? What would that do to your psyche and the decisions that you make every day and the things that you do every day? To learn that you're not real. You would start to act, you would start to act not in accordance with the law, if you will. And so, many times Christ, if you will, or Christ who descend into this reality are put into mental institutions or put into jail because, the type of information that we share. But, if a Christ being has not awoken and does a doctrine like this and says, well, I'm not real. It says nothing real can be threatened and I can't be threatened, so I'm not real. I would likely, right? Wouldn't somebody put me in some type of psychiatric ward? But maybe they wouldn't, but, from what I've seen, and what I know, people who, if someone was walking around saying, I'm not real and I can't be threatened, then they would think that something's wrong with that person. And so it says nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. And so, it says here that nothing unreal exists. And so it's really telling you that, in so many words, nothing is real. Nothing is real. Going back to the first lesson of A Course in Miracles, it really tells you that the outside world really does not exist. And so when someone tells you, okay, well, nothing exists, right, really, how would you really act? Like, what would your world look like, at the atomic level? So you really have to think about these things, because this feeds contradictions into the mind. Keep in mind, you're taught that things are real. and that you should treat them with respect, that you should treat things with respect, like signs on a road, okay? And so when you see a stop sign, you're taught that you should stop. But if you don't stop, you know, if you're doing A Course in Miracles, you'll say, well, you know, it's not real. It does not exist. The outside world itself does not exist. And so as a result of dissociating, you know, and if you don't have the ability to make reality bend to you, then you could get yourself into trouble. You could get yourself into a car accident. So you really have to be careful with this doctrine where it says, herein lies the peace of God. And so this really, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And looking at the first lesson of A Course in Miracles, telling you that, you know, these various objects mean nothing, is teaching you dissociation, is teaching you to dissociate. And so my dissociation was so bad that, you know, things that people had done in my life, I was thanking them in a way for doing it, because, you know, A Course in Miracles, although it says, this gives validity to the contradictions. Although A Course in Miracles says that the Son of God is guiltless, it makes you feel guilty throughout the doctrine, because it tells you that this is your dream and you did this. And so since I did this, right, since this was my dream, you know, I wanted my ex-husband, for example, to cheat on me. So, you know, I was so dissociated that I had, you know, I thanked my husband really for giving me the opportunity to practice forgiveness for cheating on me. You know, think about that. That's really crazy. And so Kenneth Wapnick, one of the teachers of the course, he was one of the editors, actually, I believe, as well. And he started talking about in one of his seminars how the people that do A Course in Miracles, the students of the course, they oftentimes are cuckoo and loony, basically, you know. That's what he says. He says, if you want to know about A Course in Miracles, don't ask a course student. And you can research this. In one of his videos, this is what he says. He says that, you know, A Course in Miracles students, they're so dissociated that they will bring champagne or balloons, or one of the two. They'll bring things to celebrate at a funeral. And so when my third eye opened, I realized what he was saying. What he was really saying is A Course in Miracles causes reincarnation. And so when you have a birthday, you have a death day. So people, they bring, like, you know, balloons and stuff like that to birthdays. But really within the matrix environment, when you blow out your candles, the fire in your candles on your birthday cake, you're blowing out your knowledge, because, you know, light represents knowledge. Candles represents knowledge. That's why when someone is smart, you say they're bright. And this goes back to Lucifer. A Lucifer, or Lucy, is a bearer of knowledge. And so when you descend into this reality, your mind is wiped, and they, you know, they feed you lies, omissions of the truth, and, you know, you have amnesia. You have no idea who you are. And so that's a death, really. Think about it, you know. Why do we have different religions? You know, does anybody think that that's a little interesting? You know, in this incarnation, I'm Christian. You know, that's given to you. You know, the Social Security card, a number is given to you. And your race is given to you. And your gender is given to you. And, you know, your culture, your nationality, all these things are given to you. These are labels. These are concepts that are not innate to who you are. You know, in the next incarnation, you know, you could be a different race, a different religion, a different nationality. You know, think to yourself, fundamentally, what does this mean? You know, because we're so identified with our ego, so identified with being black, with being a woman, with being a mother, a daughter, a teacher, whatever the case is. But really, you know, when you go to sleep at night, you go to the astral realm to work out your restrictions. Are you a woman? Are you black? Are you a teacher? Are you a mother? Do you have any kids? You don't really have anything. You know, you're nothing. You're no one. You're identified with nothing. And so since you came from nothing, you will go back to nothing after you give up the mind and body. And so, you know, with that being said, you know, people can advocate, people can, you know, say, oh, well, A Course in Miracles is teaching you, you know, that dissociation. But the thing is that A Course in Miracles gives you contradictions. And so that's what's so deceptive about this doctrine. It sounds good in theory to a reptilian brain person doing A Course in Miracles. And many people, who do A Course in Miracles, do not have a functioning pineal gland, third eye. They have a calcified third eye. And so in having a calcified, pineal gland, third eye, you really can't see past the insidious nature of what this doctrine is actually doing. It's actually giving you contradictions. And if you look at part 2 of my MK Ultra Monarch programming video, you will definitely see the contradictions that I outline within A Course in Miracles. But let's look at, some other things, if you will, involving the Course. And look at, a particular lesson. This lesson that I pulled out was, it's called the Atonement. It's called the Atonement. And the Atonement is a big thing, if you will, in A Course in Miracles. And so just to kind of give you some different points, if you will, from this lesson, Jesus is saying that he's in charge of the atonement process. And he says, when you offer a miracle to any of your brothers, you offer it to yourself and me. Okay, so atonement is something that you offer to everyone, including him and yourself. And so he says, the reason you come before me is because I do not need miracles for my own atonement, but I stand at the end in case you fail temporarily. So atonement is something that you can fail at giving. And so it's like a trial and error. He allows you to do it, but if you fail, then he's there to really nullify the effect of your failure, so to speak. And so he says, my part of the atonement is the canceling out of errors that you otherwise could not correct. He says, when you are brought back to your original state, you become a part of the atonement. It says, join in the unwillingness of Jesus to accept error in yourself, although it says the Son of God is guiltless. He's telling you that don't accept error within yourself. Listen to my voice, learn to undo error and to act and to correct it. That's what he says. The power to work miracles belongs to you. And so it says, I will provide opportunities to do them. And it says, I'm the only one that can perform miracles indiscriminately because I am the atonement. He says, you have a role, so ask me the miracles you should perform. Needless effort for you. It says, needless effort for you will act with direct communication. So he's saying that there's really needless effort because he's going to lead you through the process step by step. The impersonal is an essential ingredient because it allows you to direct its application under my guidance. Miracles lead to highly personal experience of revelation. So he's saying, the impersonal is needed, but it leads to the personal. A guide does not control, but he does direct, leaving it up to you to follow. Recognizing your errors and choose to abandon them by following my guidance. Errors cannot really threaten truth, which can always withstand it. And I apologize, guys, if there's I think there's someone over there is doing some lawn work, and they're staying in the same place, it seems, doing that same particular patch of land, but what have you. You are free to establish, it says that only the error is actually vulnerable. You are free to establish your kingdom where you see fit, but the right choice is inevitable if you remember this. Spirit is in a state of grace forever. Your reality is only spirit, therefore you are in a state of grace forever. It talks about how atonement undoes all errors and it uproots the source of fear. When you experience God's reassurance as threat, it's always because you are defending misplaced and misdirected loyalty. When you project this to others, you imprison them, but only to the extent that you reinforce errors that you've already made. Really, I'm not going to go through all of this because there's just a ton of things, if you will. I just want to focus on a few points. Few of the points that I've made, because I think it sounds, one thing about A Course in Miracles is very tedious, and so I don't want to lose your attention, so to speak. But let's look at some of the contradictions and the things that I did say to you. Okay, so one of the things is this. He said, listen to my voice, learn to undo error, and act to correct it. All right? So listen to him, undo what you did wrong, or learn to undo what you do wrong, and do something to correct it. When he says this, it doesn't really, it conflicts with when he says needless effort for you will act. Well, basically, there's needless effort on your part, for you will actually experience direct communication from him. So if I'm, experiencing direct communication from you, to me, this is not needless effort. Listen to my voice, learn to undo error, act to correct it. To me, that's not needless effort. That takes a lot of effort. And so the reason you come before me is because I do not need miracles for my own atonement, but I stand at the end in case you fail temporarily. And so, again, he says needless effort for you will act, so basically, I will act in direct communication with you. Well, if you're actually there at the end in case I fail, I thought you said that you would be with me every step of the way. Does that make sense? I'll say that again. It says, the reason you come before me is because I do not need miracles for my own atonement, but I stand at the end in case you fail temporarily. Okay? So he's like, look, I'm going to let you go ahead and work it out, basically. But if you fail, I'm here at the end to correct whatever you didn't do right. But he said needless effort, is needed, and that, you will act in direct communication with him pretty much throughout this entire experience. So this is a major contradiction. Remember, A Course in Miracles feeds contradiction after contradiction after contradiction into the mind. And like I said, the Bible, contradictions are riddled throughout the entire Bible. It's spaced out more. But this is like within the same sentence, within the same paragraph. And, it doesn't really, like I said, the brain learns things in patterns. And so it doesn't necessarily follow a particular cadence, if you will. Everything is kind of jumbled up. So this is designed to actually destroy the mind. So it says, join in the unwillingness of Jesus to accept error in yourself. So this goes against one of the major overarching themes of A Course in Miracles, which is God's Son is guiltless. If God's Son is guiltless, then why would you accept error within yourself? It's like you're guiltless, but these are the things that are wrong with you. So this is a contradiction as well. Another thing is, Jesus is saying here, I will provide the opportunities for you to perform the atonement. And so this gives the idea that you are in a, I guess as you would say, simulation. This gives the idea that you are in a simulation and that the experiences that you're using the atonement for are artificial. So this even aids in the dissociation, if you will, where people become dissociated who do A Course in Miracles. And I think this goes back to Ken Wapnick and how he talked about, people who do A Course in Miracles, they act inappropriately at certain settings. Like I said, funerals, they bring balloons and champagne and stuff like that to a funeral. Who would do something like that? You know what I mean? That behavior doesn't coincide with the type of setting. Like if I went to a funeral and I was like popping crystal and stuff like that, and had balloons and stuff, people would probably think that I was very sadistic and would think that I'm crazy, and really people would think that that's very offensive, right? But according to Ken Wapnick, this is what people do who do A Course in Miracles. I'm not lying. So what I'm telling you is that, A Course in Miracles is definitely, from my research and according to people who teach A Course in Miracles, such as Ken Wapnick, that, it can cause people to dissociate and act in ways that is not in accordance with being what you would call quote unquote normal. And so, like I said, I experienced a nervous breakdown, and I was almost committed, actually, after doing A Course in Miracles because of these various contradictions. If you read this and you think, okay, Jesus is providing opportunities for me to practice the atonement, then that is saying to me in my mind that these simulations are not real. So say if I'm trying to practice the atonement with the people that gang stalked me outside the library, I was gang stalked outside the library, and I was doing my taping, and I was told to be quiet while I was doing my taping. And so if I'm doing the course, that really makes me believe psychologically, right, that Jesus is providing this opportunity for me to practice forgiveness and atonement and, and at one-ment, if you will, within this particular scenario. And so this is dissociation. This is dissociative. So, if I told the people, if I was, during the gang stalking experience, if I told the people, outside of the library, if I said to them, well, this is not real. And, Jesus is providing this opportunity for us to practice atonement, for me to practice the atonement with you. And, you're my brothers or what have you. And I love you and peace and love and here Greece or what have you. What would they really say to me? You know what I mean? What would they say? In fact, I might practice this and do like a little a little experiment, if you will. Just to see, how a course student, simulation wise, how people would respond to a course student given the type of instruction and the type of commentary that the course gives about these particular principles, if you will, what people would say. And so the course is all about dissociation. Now, it says that the impersonal is an essential ingredient to the atonement, right? Impersonal. It shouldn't be something that's personal. But it asks you, he tells you to ask him what miracles that he should perform. So that's personal to me. Like, if I say it's essential for the miracles to be impersonal, but if I ask you the miracles that I should perform, isn't that personal? So say, for example, like right now, because I had an issue at the library where I was, gang stalked outside the library. And so, I, as a Course in Miracles student, I would say, okay, you know what? That's a miracle that I think I need to perform because it did not go well. That experience did not make me feel good, and I was attacked. I felt attacked, if you will, and harassed, if you will. Not attacked per se, but harassed. And since I felt harassed, I want to offer the atonement to my brothers or the people that I felt harassed me. And so to me, that's personal. But it says right here that the impersonal is essential, okay? And so it allows him to direct its application. He says the impersonal is an essential ingredient because it allows me to direct its application and under my guidance. It says that miracles lead to highly personal experiences of revelation. But in the same sense, it says you have a role, so ask me the miracles that you should perform. You just said it should be impersonal and it's something that you should direct. But then you're asking me to ask you what miracles that I should perform. This doesn't make any sense. This is severe contradiction. And so in the mind, the way that the mind works, you can't say one thing, it's impersonal, and I direct, this miracles, atonement, what have you. But then say, ask me the miracles that you should perform. That's two different things within the same doctrine. So this is what I call a square and circle scenario. And so whenever you're giving the mind square and circle scenarios, you're making the mind work against itself. And as you're making the mind work against itself, you're trying to destroy the mind. You're destroying the mind. And so whenever you're doing this, this causes a dissociation. So when someone is fully dissociated, you can make them do whatever you want to. You know, I mean, people who are fully dissociated, they're like, you know, assassins, theta assassins. You can get them to kill people. You know, you can get them to get into car accidents. You know, you can get them to do whatever. You know, turn tricks. You know, I mean, you can get people to do almost anything if they're dissociated, and you make them detached from reality. And you know, and so when you study MK Ultra and, you know, mind dissociations and so forth, and Monarch programming, it talks about how the so-called government used MK Ultra to do these things, you know, to target people, and to get them to conduct assassinations, to get them to, you know, resort to things like prostitution, and so forth, because they're dissociated. You know, it's like killing someone alive, like, you know, like they're still functioning, but they're dead because you control them like a robot, basically. And so this is what this is doing. A Course in Miracles is really taking someone's divinity and making them into a robot, so you can make them do whatever you want them to do, because they're fully dissociated. And so that chair doesn't mean anything, that body doesn't mean anything, that sign doesn't mean anything, you know, that lamp doesn't mean anything, that door doesn't mean anything, you know, the world is not real. I mean, this is what A Course in Miracles is saying. You know, what are you doing to the mind when you do that? And also, what are you doing to the mind when you're putting contradictions within the same sentence? This is jumbling out the mind. And so this is like telling a kid in a room, put a square into a circle. You're sick as a doctor to even ask somebody to do that, because you know it's impossible. And then, you know, during the time I was doing A Course in Miracles, I was also being given and channeled information to do things like indulge in a vegan diet. So let me just kind of paint a picture to you. A Course in Miracles is super duper psychological, which means that it's super spiritual. So when someone is super psychological and spiritual, and I was raised super psychological and spiritual anyway, super duper right-brained, you know, according to the rules of the universe, there's a lot of life force in vegetables, which is super spiritual. So if I'm already super spiritual and I'm actually eating a lot of vegetables and no meat, right? So that means that I have less serotonin in my brain, or dopamine. And then I'm doing A Course in Miracles, which, you know, depresses me and dissociates me. Then that's going to make me even more, you know, depressed and more susceptible to suggestion and so forth. And so, you know, it inflated my feminine even more, because my masculine was already deflated by sexual abuse. You know, my kundalini was rotted out when I was a little girl. And so having my kundalini rotted out, you know, as a little kid with sexual abuse, and also, what is it, you know, the various constructs of the matrix, and having my mind programmed to take away my free will, you know, subliminally programmed through the various constructs of the matrix, and then to, you know, observe the vegan diet, and then to do, what is it, A Course in Miracles, you know, that is the reason why I, you know, actually had a nervous breakdown. I had a nervous breakdown. And so A Course in Miracles really put a nail in my coffin, to be honest with you. And if it were not for the little bit of melanin that I have left, I would, you know, be in some type of insane asylum at this point. And, you know, not able to have my cell phone, and to do, you know, to document, if you will, lots of things that I've endured. Because, you know, they want to get you into a place where you can't, you know, fight back. You know, you can't fight back, you can't document. You can't put light on situations. So if you're locked up in an insane asylum, guess what? It's curtains for you, basically. They can do whatever programming they want to do in there. Or you're in a jail, curtains for you. You know what I mean? There's nothing that, no one knows what's going on in a jail, and no one knows what's going on in an insane asylum. Your rights have been taken away from you. You have no more rights. You have no more free will. You're susceptible to the government and what they plan on doing to you, if you will, in those particular types of institutions. So, a lot of this stuff is just, crazy. Needless effort. He's saying that needless effort is required because you'll be under direct application or communication with Jesus. However, he says that, I'm going to let you try and fail, and if you fail, then I'll be here at the end. That's not direct communication. That's a contradiction. It says a guide does not control, but does direct, leaving it up to you to follow. Recognize your errors and choose to abandon them by following my guidance. So, you said that a guide does not control, right? But then it says, follow my guidance. To me, that's a contradiction. A guide does not control, but he does direct, leaving it up to you to follow. But then it says, follow my guidance. That's what it says. Recognize your errors and choose to abandon them by following my guidance. And so it says leaving it up to you to follow. So why does it say leave it up to you to follow, but then it says follow my guidance? Do you see what I'm saying? Let me repeat that again. A guide does not control, but he does direct, leaving it up to you to follow. Okay, so I don't control this, but I leave it up to you to follow, right? But then it says recognize your errors and choose to abandon them by following my guidance. That's the contradiction there. You're feeding contradictions to the mind. Within the same paragraph. That's crazy. You are free to establish your kingdom where you see fit. Okay, so you're telling me to recognize my errors and abandon them, but then you say that I'm free to establish my kingdom where I see fit. No, you just said recognize what you did wrong and abandon it. How can that coincide with establish my kingdom where I see fit? That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any logical sense. And then when it says your reality is only spirit, therefore you are in a state of grace forever, it really is trying to give you a blanket there to say, you know what? It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what you do here in this world because you're in a state of grace. So this is just a simulation. So if you do something messed up, guess what? You're in a state of grace. Everything is spirit. It's telling you that everything is spirit here. It's telling you that, it does not matter. Things at the atomic level do not matter. And this goes to, my whole philosophy about how the matrix environment is designed to take away the masculine. The masculine is the physical, is the reptilian brain, is what you can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. It's designed to deflate that aspect of you and to inflate the spiritual aspect of you, the psychological aspect. And so when it says your reality is only spirit, it's really suggesting to make you an unholy being and to get rid of your masculine, atomic, physical, masculine, reptilian self, and to just, leave you spiritual. This is unholy. Christ is holy. Christ is both spiritual and earthly. And unless you actually balance the two, you will not ascend. And so when you think about ascension, think about a plane. You can't have a super duper big right wing, right, which is feminine, and then no left wing or a very small left wing. If that's the case, you will remain earthbound like a plane. A plane has to have equal, those wings have to be equal for you to actually even get into the sky. But this is saying your reality is only spirit. There is no physical here. So if I get stopped by the cops or what have you, because I did the first lesson of a course and it says that sign means nothing, and I tell the police officer, well, that sign means nothing. Everything is spirit. I'm in a state of grace forever. Is he still going to give me a ticket? Is he still going to, Will someone, still die at the atomic level if I hit them in a car accident because I ran a stop sign? Will I be at fault for that still? Because A Course in Miracles doesn't say that. Like A Course in Miracles, it says that sign does not mean anything, but it does not say if you run the stop sign, and you get into a car accident, then it is not your fault. It doesn't say that. So, A Course in Miracles, just to kind of end it on this note, I read somewhere that Helen Schuckman did not want to be known as the author of A Course in Miracles before she died. And she said that, Jesus was the one that was scribing this, but Jesus would not have been his name during the time that he supposedly walked the earth. So that goes to show that the people that govern our existence, that, they base their doctrines off of Greek. That's why Jesus is Jesus. Greek and Egyptian mythology, right? Horus, so forth, associated with Jesus. And that these are man-made things. These are not doctrines that are what people consider to be, well, from my perspective, these are not divine. This is not divine. Or as the result of divinity, I should say. You know what I mean? They are not. And so, that's just my opinion. Like I said, I had a nervous breakdown because of all the contradictions that were fed into my consciousness based upon this doctrine. But if you found success, I'm all about balance. So if you want to comment about anything that I've said here and say, oh, well, it made me feel good to, it helped me when it said here that, to abandon your errors and to correct your errors. But it said, I'm free to establish my kingdom where I see fit. That's a contradiction to me. If I'm wrong and it says correct it, but then it says, oh, you can do whatever you want. Establish your kingdom where you see fit. Well, which one is it? Do I correct my errors or do I establish my kingdom where I see fit? This is a contradiction within the same mind. But if things like this helped your mind and helped you to, achieve enlightenment, if you will, and you can explain these contradictions to me, absolutely, it's fair game, just like with the Bible stuff. If you can explain to me Deuteronomy 28:30, where it says, the Lord says, in that scripture, if you betroth a wife, then I will cause another man to lie with her. And, you can explain how that contradicts with one of the Ten Commandments, which says, thou shalt not commit adultery. And you can explain that to me. I mean, hey, I'm all for it. I'm all about having a conversation. And so, lately, there's definitely been debates, if you will, in terms of YouTube and how YouTube is, about censorship and stuff like that. But, I'm all about having a conversation because I feel that everything is a part of the collective unconscious mind of God, all sides. And so, when you're trying to cut off a side, then it's like cutting off an arm, Who in their right mind would cut an arm off? Who would circumcise the masculine aspect of themselves? I don't cut off the fact that I was raised Christian. There was, since I've been, not Christian, I've gone to church with my mother on Easter. This past Easter, I went to my church with my mom on Palm Sunday. I've gone to church with my mom since then, and I'm not Christian, but I know that that's a part of my upbringing and so forth. And so, to deny that aspect of me is to deny the Christ aspect of me as well. And so I'm not just about understanding as a slave, but I overstand as a God. And so since I overstand as a God and understand as a slave, I can be the totality, the Christ of who I am. But some people want to just chop off aspects of themselves and be holy. But to me, that does not make any sense. This world teaches you that it's not okay to embrace yourself. It's not okay to be angry. It's not okay to be afraid. It's not okay to be sad. It's not okay to be, whatever, judgmental, whatever the case is. When you're suppressing those masculine aspects of yourself, you will meet that at the end. And this environment, this matrix environment, is making you deny these so-called bad aspects of yourself. But love is everything. Love is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So on that note, guys, I'm going to shut this video down, and I will see you in my next one.